Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Don Vincent. I'm the publisher of the Daily Line. Thank you for joining us on our call this morning, or this afternoon, excuse me. Joining us today is Erin Hegarty, Caroline Kuzanski, Caroline, and our editor, Alex Nitkin, who is calling in remotely right now as we restart a computer. Welcome to the inaugural The Press Box, our first event here where we hope to be having reporters talking with reporters about the issues that are at hand. Alex, when you're ready, we can go ahead and get started here.
Sure, yeah, and I apologize, I'm talking to you from my phone, which is why I have the weird vertical interface here, but I had my Teams crashed on my computer and I'm trying to bring that back up. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. This is something we've been looking forward to and trying to do for a while here, just to have kind of general casual conversations about everything that we're seeing and sort of what it all looks like from our perspective. And yeah, we want to be able to do this on a at least monthly, maybe twice a month basis, and either talk amongst ourselves or maybe bring on some other reporters and just try to bring people up to date a little bit. So if you want to, Don, bring up our agenda for today. I'm glad that we chose today to do this because, oh my gosh, what a day we had yesterday with this city council meeting. This meeting had everything. It had soaring rhetoric. It had cutthroat parliamentary maneuvers. It had Ed Burke citing some random legal precedent from decades ago. Dick Mell was there for a hot second. Yeah, so I think that there's a lot to talk about, both in terms of we want to go over new legislation that was passed, and I'm sorry, I'm still trying to look how to join on my computer. To pause 1 second, sorry, Don, is there a way that you can resend like an invitation to me, or maybe if I hop off from here, I can jump
Alex,
on my computer? I'm wondering how to switch
just
back over.
Go ahead and continue on. We're good.
Should we just do it? All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So a lot to go over today, a lot of things. Mostly we want to start with legislation that passed, towing ordinance, some really big new developments. What we thought we were going to maybe be talking about was Lakeshore Drive renaming among things that passed, but that is, I think, what we need to start with here. We're going to give a little bit of history, and I want to toss it to Erin in a second to talk about that. But first, to just sort of explain what yesterday, there are two, just to give it a little bit of background, I'm sure that there are many people on this call who are already well aware of this, but two legislative maneuvers that we need to talk about that aldermen will do to sometimes hold up or stall or get in the way of one another's legislation. One is a defer and publish, a D&P, when any two aldermen can just team up and say that any proposal that is on the table has to wait until the next city council meeting. It can be, if the mayor's proposal, if one of them proposal the mayor's backing gets deferred and published, we've seen that they just turn around and have it in the meeting again immediately in a couple days, or in most cases, like what seems like is happening here, it'll just have to wait another month. Usually it will just end up being a delay and not be super meaningful, but sometimes it'll really, that month-long delay can make a pretty critical difference, like we saw, when was this? I guess 2 months ago now, with the Alderwoman Haddon's resolution condemning state-based violence in India. That was deferred and published, and then the next meeting after that, it got voted down. So that's deferring and publishing. There's also the process of sending a new ordinance as it's being introduced to the Rules Committee. And that can happen, any individual alderman, if it is at the right moment, can just, by saying a single word, by diverting an ordinance or new measure, what have you, by bringing up the name of a different committee than what is proposed in the first place, it'll just automatically be deferred to the Committee on Committees and Rules, where it maybe never necessarily has to have a hearing. It really is up to the chair of that committee, Alderman Michelle Harris, who also happens to be Mayor Lightfoot's floor leader. So in this case, we were moving yesterday toward a vote on Alderman David Moore and Alderman Sophia King's proposal to rename Lakeshore Drive after Jean-Baptiste Point de Sable. Sophia King tried to immediately call for a roll call vote. And after she did that, the mayor, who was presiding over the city council meeting, said, well, wait a minute, I think that Alderman Brian Hopkins, second ward, had his hand up first. So let's hear what Alderman Hopkins has to say. Hopkins moves to defer and publish. Alderman Raboyres is his partner on that. And so basically this is stalled. Alderman Moore, very unhappy about this. He basically says, that's it, I'm gonna defer and publish everything that ever comes up until this is heard, because we've been working for a long time on this. And then right after this, some new ordinances start to be introduced from aldermen, and trying to bring up what some of those were, but basically the way that it goes is the Peter in the clerk's office says, in the 48th ward, Alderman Osterman has recommended or is introducing an ordinance for a sign permit at this address, and it's going to the Committee on Transportation, and Alderman Moore yells out budget, and so, well, that's going to Rules Committee, and then another sign proposal from Osterman, and that is going to whatever committee, and Moore shouts out Finance, and so that goes to Rules Committee, and everyone is just sort of standing there in awe, being like, oh, he's really doing this. This is something that I've personally never seen, and I don't think has happened in a long time, if ever. So that was a long wind up to, that was what we saw yesterday, and what I think made this in part such a shocking and interesting and different city council meeting. We now have at least 20 ordinances that are in Rules Committee. We understand that there's going to be a Rules Committee meeting potentially Tuesday, definitely next week at some point, to resurrect all those and re-refer them to their committees. But let's rewind the clock on this a little bit. And I know that that was a lot of explanation, but let's talk about, bring us back to 10 years ago on October 2019, when Alderman King and Moore brought this up in the first place. So Erin, can you just sort of chart the course of this ordinance, what it was originally supposed to be and how it got to the point where it is now?
Yeah, so like you said, Alderman Moore and Alderwoman King introduced the ordinance to rename Lakeshore Drive after Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable, who is, the city's first permanent non-Indigenous settler, to name Lakeshore Drive after him in his honor. In talking to Moore, he said, this was introduced in October 2019. He was originally asked to hold off on it for a little while because they were coming up on Lightfoot's first budget season. He was amenable to that. Then you get into 2020, the pandemic happens, his ordinance is further delayed. Finally, he gets to a subject matter hearing on the issue in December 2020. And I think there was even some delay in scheduling that because meeting agendas weren't posted at the correct time. And it was during that meeting that it was suggested that instead of renaming all of Lakeshore Drive, which has an inner and an outer portion, that Moore kind of tamped down the proposal and only rename outer Lakeshore Drive after du Sable. And this is kind of suggested because that way it wouldn't affect all the residential buildings that are on Lakeshore Drive, and the people's whose addresses would have to be changed. I guess it would be logistically a lot of work. So Moore and King agreed to that, because it would still be renaming Lakeshore Drive. And during that December committee hearing or subject matter hearing, the chair of the committee, Alderman Howard Brookins, said that he would, call the matter for a vote in April. And I think that really peeved Alderman Moore because, you have the subject matter hearing. This was introduced at that point over a year ago. I don't think, it's probably frustrating to have to wait that long to get your ordinance called for a vote. So we have an April vote coming up. And kind of at least from December 2020 up until this week, there was a core group, I'd say, of advocates for renaming Lakeshore Drive after du Sable, part of the Black Heroes Matter coalition, and they would call in to almost literally every city council committee meeting, urging aldermen to vote yes on renaming Lakeshore Drive, and not only renaming Lakeshore Drive, but also to dedicate a full city holiday to DuSable and provide funding for a 20-foot statue of DuSable in Grant Park. So just like he said he would, Alderman Brookins calls this for a vote in April, but not in time for the ordinance to make it to the full city council during the April meeting. So he calls this for a vote at the end of April. And that meeting got pretty heated because as it was, the ordinance was being introduced, CDOT, I guess, had technical changes to the ordinance because there's certain ways, I guess, you have to refer to Lakeshore Drive. You can't just say, from Hollywood Avenue to 67th Street. There's technicalities. But this was the first time that Alderman Moore said he had heard of these changes, and he said, he'd been trying to work with CDOT for months at that point. And it would have actually extended it would have made the renaming a different, it would have extended the renaming past where he wanted to. So he kind of erupted, and like I said, it was so heated that Alderman Brookins called for a recess. They recessed for about 5 minutes. They came back. There was some atlas waving by Alderman Burke, and the proposal passed unanimously. So I think the thought was kind of that it would come to city council and it potentially would also pass unanimously. The thing is, just hours before this vote happened in April, Mayor Lightfoot introduced her own proposal for honoring DuSable, which does not include renaming Lakeshore Drive. It includes naming the downtown Riverwalk after him. It includes building 3 statues dedicated to DuSable and his wife, Sihawa, near the Riverwalk, and connecting that to a DuSable Park, which is also a long time in the making.
So I want to pause here and just talk a little bit more about that. Can you all hear me, by the way? I'm back on my computer. I think I got it fixed. I got my press box background just to really set the scene. I thought that there were a lot of interesting things about that committee meeting last month, but I think 2 things really stood out. One is that even though CDOT was just coming in with what seemed like some technical changes that they argued at the time was really continuing the original thrust and purpose of what Moore's proposal was, that there was this really sharp backlash to that, not just by Moore, but also like Alderwoman Taylor and Vasquez saying that this is really disrespectful from the administration. And I think it points to this larger feeling that continued until yesterday of Moore and King had spent months and months really shopping their proposal around through the city council. And it seemed like the administration may have been caught a little bit flat-footed toward the end and bringing in at the last minute and saying, well, wait a minute, we want to do our own different thing. I think that struck a really bitter nerve with aldermen and had got at something that some aldermen have been complaining about publicly and privately about a sort of lack of engagement with the mayor's office. The other thing that I found really interesting about that was that meeting was held right after the mayor introduced her alternative plan that you were just talking about, Erin, to have the Riverwalk and 3 statues, and it would flow into DuSable Park, which is going to be built right next to those 2 new towers on the Spire site where the river meets the lake. And that was all proposed and ballyhooed by the administration right before this committee meeting. And then it never even came up. It wasn't even mentioned, that counterproposal, during that meeting, right? So this all gets to what happens next with this. What happens now? Well, I also want to mention one other relevant point, which is that in the past month, David Moore has become a statewide candidate for Secretary of State. And so this has sort of been elevated onto a higher profile. The question of what happens now, here we have these 2 proposals. Technically, Moore and King's proposal is still just going to be delayed a month. It's still going to come up. He was confident that he had the votes to pass it. I heard that from other aldermen too. And he basically said, of course we had the votes to pass it. That's why they deferred and published it, because that's how you stall it then. On the other hand, when the mayor was asked about this yesterday, she basically stopped just short of saying, I don't want to rename Lakeshore Drive. She said, there are a lot of people who have opposition to this, and it's an iconic parkway, it's an iconic road and name, and I have my other proposals, so I'm going to propose it, and we're going to see what happens in City Council. The thing that is that's, I guess, hard for me and some of us to understand is how exactly is that going to happen, and like with a lot of other issues, who is going to be the mayor's City Council constituency to really push for her proposal? Because so far we haven't really seen a lot of people step up for that.
Alex,
And yes.
are you down to speculate as to why Lightfoot doesn't want to rename Lakeshore Drive?
I don't know. I think that she's played this pretty close to the vest. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Erin, but it seems like she has generally been resistant to it on the grounds of sort of a marketing and tourism perspective of people are really attached to the name, and she wants to do other plan. The other thing that she said yesterday at this press conference was, well, I think the delay was appropriate because people haven't really had a lot of time to consider this. At that point, like, a lot of us kind of did a double take, because it's like, this has literally been on the table for 17 months.
Yeah, that was funny. I mean, Alderman Moore himself has referenced how long this has been, waiting to pass by saying, an ordinance on puppy mills got passed faster than this. And what I've heard her say is all based on a marketing perspective as to why she doesn't want to rename Lakeshore Drive. And she says, it's iconic. When people think of Chicago, they think of Lakeshore Drive. But I think a public commenter during one of the meetings, a recent, I think, committee meeting, had an interesting point that names of things get changed all the time. The Sears Tower is the Willis Tower, but I and probably lots of other people still refer to it as the Sears Tower. Whatever you want to call White Sox Park, that's what it is. It's guaranteed rate field, but it's been renamed. Some people still call it Comiskey. So I don't know if it goes beyond a marketing reason why she doesn't want to rename it, but that's what she said, I think, at this point, and that there are other ways to honor DuSable, but I also wondered why those other suggestions are just bubbling up now and why they didn't bubble up over the past 18 months.
Right. I want to move on here in a second, but yeah, on that point, I think there is an argument to be made that maybe a place where you can go and learn and reflect about DuSable might be a more appropriate way to commemorate him than naming a highway after him is an argument that we've heard. And also, I saw Matt Harvey at the Tribe tweeted this morning, like, if you want to commemorate, like you were saying, Erin, if you want to commemorate DuSable, name something after him that people will actually call DuSable, because, like, yeah, people are probably going to be still saying Lakeshore Drive. Okay, we should move on. Next, we are going to talk about, all right, so this was one of the most substantive pieces, I think, of new legislation that actually became law yesterday that there was very little discussion of. But you can see here my picture that I took of Lincoln Towing, the infamous Lincoln Towing. Now, I guess it's rebranded as Protective Parking Service, which is like the name of its LLC. Really infamous for bad, nefarious towing practices. It went through this long legal battle with the Illinois Commerce Commission over the last couple of years, who almost shut it down, but then they were able to appeal to get the ICC's decision overturned. And so late last year, Gilbert Villegas, chair of the Economic Development Committee, now, by the way, new chair of the City Council Latino Caucus, says, I'm going to introduce an ordinance to crack down on the rogue towers, the Wild West of towers. So what was that all about, Erin? What was in that ordinance, and how has it been shaped to what it is now?
Yeah, so basically this requires that towing companies and individual trucks have licenses to operate in tow in the city of Chicago. One of the things that Villegas, had said that these companies have been doing is they're soliciting business at crash sites, which I don't know if you've been, in a car crash, but you're probably a bit frantic. It's a chaotic situation. You could probably be easily coerced into giving a tow company your business at a crash site. But this would impose, in addition to licensing tow truck drivers and the towing yards, companies would face penalties if they are soliciting business at crash sites or impersonating government officials, which I've never encountered, but apparently it's an issue. Tow truck drivers showing up at crashes or various places and saying they're with the city or they're with the police department, they're gonna tow your vehicle, and then there's all these hidden fees and hoops to jump through to get your car. So this licenses them. You will know that a truck is licensed by the city because they have to attach like a city issued emblem to or inside their tow vehicle. And this was delayed in committee last month in April when Chair Emma Mitz held it because aldermen were kind of peeved that they didn't have enough time to consider modifications made to the ordinance, and they were also questioning whether it would apply to any companies doing business on behalf of the city. So it came back in May to the committee. There was very little discussion on it in May. No real substantive discussion, just aldermen giving examples of bad experiences they've had with towing companies. And one thing that was added is a carve out to any company that's contracting with the city to do towing services. But from my understanding and in talking to a few people, it's only one company I think that would be doing this with the city, that does this with the city. So it wouldn't be the carve out wouldn't be too far reaching, and it should still be, most towing companies need to be licensed in order to operate in Chicago.
So it seems like really the upshot here and the idea behind this was that now the city itself will be empowered to pull the license of a tow truck operator that has a police scanner and is listening for crashes so they can roll up on an accident and be like, hey, we need to tow you. You owe us $400. I mean, that's kind of an oversimplification, but it now empowers the city's BACP, the license department, to say, we're yanking your license if we don't like what you're doing.
Alderman had given various examples of crashes that had happened because a tow truck was, going the wrong way down a one-way street or speeding to an accident site because they heard about it over the police scanner that they were listening to. So,
yes. Yeah. So before we move on to new development, I just want to make sure that everyone knows we are going to have a Q&A at the end of this. So please feel free to pop questions into the chat. I think we already have one or two coming in, but we want to see those. And also, we know there are a lot of knowledgeable people here listening, so if we goof up any details, feel free to chat that in there. Let us know anything we should. So it was a big month for zoning, big month for new development, probably the highest profile or, well, the biggest in terms of the dollar amount and scope and size of all of the new projects that were rezoned was the Moody Bible North Union campus. More than 2,300, I think, new apartments proposed next to the site of Moody Bible. I want to talk about that in a second, but first, what really generated debate yesterday, one of the things that really generated debate yesterday was a proposal by this Utah-based company called Code RE Partners to do an adaptive reuse to take two old abandoned industrial buildings, former industrial buildings, and put one as fill one with 120 unit all affordable apartments and another with just a big commercial building. This was extremely contentious last month at Chicago Plan Commission, which Caroline was covering. I don't know, Caroline, it seems like pretty uncontroversial development to me. It's affordable apartments. It's right across from the park. Seems pretty straightforward, right?
Well, you would think, and then the fact that it's about 650 feet away from the matte asphalt plant.
There is that, yeah.
Also across from McKinley Park was a major issue. And so this did pass the Plan Commission 7-4. All three aldermen who are on the Plan Commission did vote in favor of the development. And basically it was a push and pull between this thing is going to be 120 units of actually affordable housing right across from one of the city's like largest and nicest parks. And it's 650 feet away from this asphalt plant, which has carcinogenous emissions, basically. And so the chair of the Plan Commission said that she ultimately ended up voting against this because she had just had a conversation with a woman whose 2 adult sons had both passed away from the same kind of cancer, and they had lived right near the asphalt plant. And the
Plan Commission Chair Teresa Cordova, you're
yes,
talking about, right?
That's exactly who I'm referring to. Sorry about that. And the activist group Neighbors for Environmental Justice had written a letter to the commission opposing the project, basically saying we reject the false choice between affordable housing and clean air, basically asking why is this the only place where you can have affordable housing. And so this did get approved after the development team went back over their air filtration policies, the fast growing greenery that they're going to put around and within the development to make sure that the air is like tolerably clean, I guess. They said that only 7% of the time does the wind blow in the direction from the asphalt plant to the developments. The rest of the time, the prevailing winds blow away from it. There was big discussion about whether the windows are going to help keep air clean inside the building, and Alderman Cardenas, who, within whose ward this is all happening, was a really staunch defender of the whole development. He said, this has been going on for 2 years. I really want to see this get built. I really trust that the developers kind of know what they're doing here and they know what they're getting themselves into. And he was pretty annoyed when Chair Cordova didn't let him speak alongside the developers and the questioning commissioners. He felt really strongly that he knew what was going on in his ward, and he knew what it needed. And he also kind of questioned the veracity of the complaints about the asphalt plant that had been filed. He said that they came while the plant wasn't actually operational, that people were told to call and complain even though there weren't any problems with the thing, and so on and so forth. He was not super happy that this was getting so much attention. So it did pass 7-4, then it passed in City Council as well, despite significant concerns from some of the more progressive members of the council. Right.
So I think that's a really good recap of, I think that there are 2 specific undercurrents of this that I found really interesting in this, in addition to this very intense debate about, and ongoing debates among the city about environmental justice, environmental racism, these real conversations that the city is having, I think, more than it did before about what are we doing to help, create more justice for people who are living in polluted parts of the city, and also, of course, affordable housing. There is also this issue of aldermanic prerogative, aldermanic privilege, like you were describing, Caroline, that really played out right in front of us yesterday, where a lot of Cardenas's arguments were not necessarily, on the one hand, it was, yes, here is why I think this is a good idea on the merits, but a lot of what his posture was and what his reasoning was like, look at me, I'm the alderman. I'm the one who's responsible for this. Like, how dare you basically question the fact that I would do due diligence about this? He was saying, like, yesterday, you all know how this works. You're in constant communication with the developer and you ask them to make modifications until you're satisfied. And he was basically like, I have the credibility to this, so trust me. The other aspect of this, what I think was the ongoing like saga of him and MAT Asphalt, MAT Asphalt, this plant that is in the center of this. It was pointed out yesterday, this is not like an old historic asphalt plant. It opened in 2018, and this is something that Cardenas has gotten a lot of heat for, particularly because he's the chair of the Energy and Environmental Protection Committee, which we haven't even mentioned so far, but also because that was able to open without any meetings or approvals or regulation, at least on the city level, which inspired a lot of backlash among neighbors. And yeah, as you mentioned, Caroline, Cardenas has basically accused a lot of that opposition accused them of being a kind of astroturf operation. He's invoked his kind of like arch political nemesis, Senator Tony Munoz, as being a big part of that. And a lot of that is him sort of delegitimizing that protest and saying, look, there are schools in this area, there's a park in this area, there's a whole community there, and like the community supports it. And you know, what are we gonna not let them be there too because there's an asphalt plant? Alderman Rosa, Carlos Ramirez Rosa, made another interesting response to that, I think, yesterday, which was, yeah, there are schools and there's a park and there are people who live there and they hate that plant. It smells bad. It's like no one asked for that. So it's this whole ongoing back and forth. Ultimately, the vote was, I think, 39-13 in favor of it. So it ended up moving forward. Anything else, Caroline, that you want to add on that or North Union?
On North Union, I don't think we have really talked about that yet. I mean, that got a ton of attention and praise in Planning Commission. I think it's going to produce about 4,000 units of affordable housing total. There's 1,372 new homes coming to the Moody Bible Institute site. And then because Moody Bible is selling the JDL developer a piece of this project, basically, they're going to add another about 2,600 new homes there. And then about 13% of those homes are going to be rented at about 60% of the area median income, which is about $100,000 in that area. And the whole thing, it's like kind of hard to conceive of how big it's going to be. It's on an existing street grid and it's about 750,000 square feet in total. I don't think that's including outdoor space, but I could be wrong. So don't quote me on that.
So that's just like the outdoor floor area, right? That's not including all the different levels. So no, like,
because it's going to be like 5 or 7 different buildings built in 5 phases over 10 years. So I will be 31 by the time this development is completed.
I think that it's worth pointing out, number one, I think how little fanfare, well, not fanfare, but how little pushback or criticism there seemed to be, at least by the time it got to Plan Commission or zoning. Yeah. And you could tie that in with the fact that this is one of the first developments that was proposed using Planning Development's new master plan development process, which basically attaches tougher scrutiny and a tougher community vetting process to proposals that are more than, I forget the threshold, something like 10 or so acres. Basically mega developments like this, they have to go through a tougher process. They implemented this after Lincoln Yards and all of that whole fiasco, I think we can call it, in terms of the community response. And so far, it's just been used for this and the Michael Reese redevelopment, what's now called Bronzeville Lakefront, both of which are massive and have, I think, very clearly had much less, at least as far as we can tell, community pushback than Lincoln Yards in the 78 is. So maybe DPD could be onto something with this master plan development concept.
Could I add one thing there?
Yeah.
One other kind of element of this that the developers got a ton of basically accolades for in Planning Commission was, it seems like Jim Letchinger, who's the head of JDL, kind of was aware that he was going to be subject to, the whole book of city regulations as far as inclusive contracting and making sure that economic benefits are distributed and making sure that like real community benefit is absorbed, because he spent a lot of time talking about all of the different plans that they had made to both open the thing up to community members so that the public green space was actually public and not sort of cordoned off. And then the plan also has extremely ambitious contracting goals as far as women and minority-owned contracting firms go, and then like 10% of the hours are going to be carried out by apprentice tradespeople, and then another 25% are going to be carried out by like women and minority-owned contractors. And so Letchinger made really sure to emphasize that a lot to the commissioners, and he got a lot of really positive feedback on that.
Yeah, I think that JDL in particular has built a pretty good reputation among the city and with housing and DPD for always knowing the right points to hit in terms of MBE and WBE hiring. This particular proposal, I think, like barely exceeds ARO. They're going to have like 13% affordable instead of 10. But I think we should move on because we have a lot to get to here. We haven't even talked about any of the new stuff that got introduced, including civilian police oversight. So there's a massive, saga of history behind, what has led us to this moment. But Erin, could you just talk a little bit about ECPS, the Empowering Communities for Public Safety Ordinance, and now the mayor's new ordinance, and sort of what they do and how they differ?
Yes. So Empowering Communities for Public Safety, or ECPS ordinance, it's basically a melding of previous GAPA proposal and CPAC proposal. They were competing, to my knowledge, up until just a few months ago, to be the civilian oversight of CPD ordinance to be passed by City Council. But the ECPS ordinance now is largely based on GAPA, which has these different district councils for each, police district in the city, and those would kind of be tasked with interfacing with the community, holding meetings, talking to the community, seeing what they want, what's going right, what's not going right. And then there's this citywide commission that would have 7 members. In the ECPS ordinance now, which is different from what GAP originally proposed, there would be requirements that 2 of these members be from the north side, 2 from the south side, and 2 from the west side, and 1 person could just be from wherever in the city. And I think from what I've told, the Alderman Jason Irvin, chair of the Black Caucus, City Council's Black Caucus, had played a role in getting that kind of set up, having every part of the city represented. The other new thing with the ECPS ordinance that differs from the original GAPA proposal is how it kind of connects or could lead into something that CPAC had previously proposed. And that is that the ECPS ordinance includes a binding referendum, putting a binding referendum question on the 2022 ballot, asking Chicagoans if they would like this 7-member citywide commission to be directly elected, which is something that is drawn from the CPAC proposal. The interesting thing about that is because that binding referendum question is in the ordinance, the ECPS ordinance would require more than just a simple majority vote by the City Council to pass. Now, Mayor Lightfoot's ordinance, which he introduced on Monday, would require only a simple majority vote by City Council to pass. And what her ordinance looks like, we've kind of been waiting for a very long time for this ordinance to be submitted. She said way back in, I think it was the end of September, that she was moving on from GAPA and she was going to be proposing her own plan on police oversight. And I know I've asked the mayor's office many times when that's coming, and finally it was submitted on Monday. There's been delays in meetings of the City Council's Committee on Public Safety, as the chair of the committee is waiting for Lightfoot's proposal. And to say that people were dissatisfied with what she proposed on Monday, I think would be almost an understatement. I think, I've heard it referred to as like a watered down version of GAPA. So it is similar to GAPA and thus ECPS in that Mayor Lightfoot's proposal sets up these, district councils in each of the police districts where they interface with the communities, and it also has a 7-member citywide commission, but there is no requirement in Lightfoot's proposal that an equal number of representatives be from the north, south, and west sides, and that's kind of been a critique, because I mean, it could happen where you have a 7-member committee, all from the north side doing this. A big critique of Lightfoot's proposal is that her citywide commission is only advisory, whereas the citywide commission in the ECPS proposal would not just advise the mayor; it would have decision-making abilities when it comes to policies being enacted in the Chicago Police Department. It would also be able to appoint the head of COPA, and it would be able to choose the candidates that would be under consideration for superintendent and police board members. So I think the question kind of among critics of Lightfoot's proposal, which there are many, is why would you propose only an advisory board if
it's supposed to be police oversight? That's the whole idea,
right?
Like civilian control. I think that, Erin, you had a really good quote in your story the other day from Alderman Andre Vasquez, who was originally a supporter of CPAC and now of ECPS, saying, if you want to understand what's in Lightfoot's proposal, it's basically GAPA from a year ago, but with no community control provisions. All that stripped out, which again is obviously an oversimplification, but we have to remember that this all started originally. Lightfoot, when she was a candidate, was like a champion of the GAPA proposal. She was like, I want to pass GAPA. And then after she became mayor, there were these negotiations that went back and forth with GAPA, and it ended up being stalled right before the finish line because of this debate over whether the mayor would have final authority over policymaking decisions. And this is something that GAPA, the coalition, has really not budged from, and they call a foundational principle of any civilian oversight, because they point to the Community Civilian Oversight Commission in LA, where they do have complete oversight, and there are very rarely standoffs that would have to be there have to be a tiebreaker. The Civilian Oversight Commission usually, almost always, gets eventually to some kind of agreement with the police department, with LAPD, on policymaking decisions, and the reason for that is because LAPD knows that at the end of the day, the commission is going to have the power to make the final call, and so it's in their interest to be at the table. And I think GAPA is really concerned, and other folks who are in support of ECPS are concerned that, well, if this is basically for all intents and purposes just going to be an advisory body, CPD can just ignore them. What do they have to care about it? We should talk about. Go ahead.
Just with the advisory thing, there was an ECPS press conference this morning, and Alderman, I think it was Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa, brought up the point of, and please check me if this is wrong, but he basically said the mayor could enact an advisory committee without this whole, ordinance and quote unquote wasting paper. Why doesn't she, if she wants an advisory board, why doesn't she just create an advisory board?
Task force.
That was interesting. Yeah, task force. There you go.
So we should talk about what happens next with this, because basically Chris Taliaferro, the chairman of the Public Safety Committee, and as far as I know, the only alderman in the city council who has come out fully in favor of Lightfoot's police oversight plan, has said, okay, we're going to have.
When I talked to him earlier today, and he said he's will know where his vote lies when he votes. I think his quote was something like, I'm voting for one.
That's interesting, because he was literally quoted in the mayor's press release when she came out with her proposal on Monday, saying, this is a landmark, great achievement. So the fact that he's not fully committed to be on board, I think, is really telling. I think that there is also, again, I was talking to Vasquez yesterday, and there was some discussion about whether, I'll be honest, we were sort of half expecting Lightfoot's proposal to get sent to Rules Committee because of all the opposition. And Vasquez said, yeah, there was some discussion about that, and we were considering it, but ultimately we don't want to do that. We want this to come up and talk about it on the merits, which I think shows me two things. Number one, that just how much disdain this new younger crowd of aldermen has for the whole Rules Committee procedure in general. And although they have used it here and there in the past, but I think they have come to hate it as much as anyone now in general and not want to participate. The other thing is, it seems like it speaks to the amount of confidence that the CPS coalition has in their own proposal. And something that Vasquez said was like, no, I want to see this come up in committee. I want to see which aldermen are actually going to stick their necks out and say, I support this plan. The Black Caucus being in the mix, at least as far as Chairman Irvin is concerned, has an interesting point of view, or sort of an interesting stance, because they have technically, yes, endorsed ECPS, but also Irvin has said, we really want to see what the mayor is going to come out with. We're glad that she has her plan. We're going to keep legislating and keep negotiating. So it seems like there's no finish line quite yet, but it's anyone's guess to see, you know, what happens from here. Anything else anyone wants to add before we move on?
Yeah, no, just my main question is, how do the votes work? I like to play out situations in my head, and I just wonder, like, is the mayor's, going off of your point with Jason Irvin, like, is the mayor's proposal enough to sway anyone who was like on the fence about ECPS? Is it enough to sway them to, you know, support her proposal? Or I don't know. People who I've talked to say it's not, but again, I haven't talked to, you know, all 50 aldermen in the city council in the past 24 hours. So
we try, but all right, we should, I guess, talk about this gigantic economic development recovery package put out by the mayor yesterday. It was, gosh, I don't know, 130 pages altogether, broken up into, I think, 2 ordinances. I guess it depends on how you categorize them, but there was the business relief measure, and interestingly, I thought, right alongside that, she proposed a labor standards measure. Do you want to just quickly walk through a couple of the things that were in here, Erin?
Yeah. So I think 2 words that the mayor and even other city officials used repeatedly were, you know, red tape. This cuts through red tape. And so one of the things that this would do is it would reinstate a cap on third-party delivery fees, I guess, until the city is out of the pandemic, and that's something that the city council had approved temporarily in November, but it's since expired, and that would, you know, help restaurants out, as people are, I'm assuming, still ordering delivery, or maybe that's a new way of life, you know, you order delivery more. It would also provide $10 million in grants for businesses that were, you know, affected by the pandemic, and it would also offer kind of this like discounted plan for businesses seeking to renew their license to kind of help them out of the pandemic if they were struggling financially, which a lot were. And there's this kind of effort to fill restaurants that are or spaces that are now empty because of the pandemic. So, you know, restaurant A closes because it couldn't make it, you know, through the pandemic, and the city wants to expedite the process by which new businesses or new restaurants can come in and open up. And one of the things that Mayor Lightfoot talked about for a while yesterday was the process for legalizing signs, as I guess incredibly long in Chicago. So this would, you know, hasten the. They wouldn't
go through ordinances anymore. We wouldn't see the Transportation Committee meetings where they approve 17 pages of ordinances in 30 seconds.
I'm signing.
So I don't know. There was a similar proposal from the mayor that there was some backlash to because it seemed to skirt at some aldermanic authority. We'll have to see how much aldermen value that ability to pass signs for specific businesses through the city council process. So that was interesting, but we really need to talk about what I think immediately jumped out as one of the most visible, fortunately or unfortunately, parts of this. The ban on liquor sales, on packaged good liquor sales after 10 p.m. This like, I don't know, less than 2 hours after this 94-page ordinance was put out, we were getting emails from the Illinois Retail Merchants Association saying, hey, this is a problem. We want to have people talk to you about why this is a problem, why this is terrible. So the mayor was asked about this again today, and it seems like her rationale is, she was talking about it comes from complaints and sort of like quality of life issues, right, Erin? That she thought that it would, a lot of businesses were complaining about late, liquor sales going into the night and causing problems.
Yeah, and people gathering, I guess, at places where you would buy liquor. I mean, I don't know. I've never really gathered at a liquor store myself, but or a Jewel.
Good loitering spot.
Yeah, right. Maybe because I'm waiting for a bus, but yeah, she labels this kind of as consumer protection, but it like also has this like kind of like small carve out for supermarkets that can begin selling packaged liquor like an hour before liquor stores on a Sunday. I don't know. It seems like a huge change from like current regulations barring the pandemic restrictions where like you can sell liquor between 7 a.m. and 2 a.m. But this would cut that down to, you'd have to stop at 10 p.m., which, yeah, it clearly caught a lot of backlash, especially on social media too. And I know that was like a big complaint of people's during the pandemic, because I think it was at one point 9 p.m. where you couldn't buy 9 or 8 p.m. where you couldn't buy packaged goods. And like people weren't happy with that. So this is, I don't know, it's I've seen it criticized as like going back to the Prohibition era regulations.
Yeah, well, not exactly, but closer, I guess. This is, interestingly, Brendan Riley was at this morning's press conference, which was unrelated, which was about water infrastructure. The downtown alderman was asked whether he agrees with this, and he, very diplomatically said, like, well, we're going to go through the city council process, but Riley speaking, saying, I am more in favor of just using our existing enforcement levers to crack down on the bad actors rather than having this blanket ban. So it seems like there's a very good chance that this could get struck out. There's certainly a lot of pressure for it, and I'm sure that the mayor's team is not happy that this one small plank of a very large and far-sweeping recovery package is now getting all the attention. We should mention that, yes, this was sent to the Rules Committee, not by David Moore like all the others, but by Raymond Lopez. His explanation was he thought that aldermen hadn't had enough time to look at it. I mentioned to him, like, well, it's just being introduced, won't they have the next month? And he said, sometimes you need to send a message that, the administration needs to be more collaborative. So long story short, this is just sort of, Raymond Lopezing. Yeah, I'm sure that it will come directly, straight out of the Rules Committee anyway. By the way, I want to pause now to field a question that I think we got. And maybe we should just pause and take whatever questions we have, because I know we're already running down on time. I saw one question: what happens to all the ordinances sent to Rules Committee? Yes.
You mind if I jump in here real quick? Yeah, everybody that's on the call, please know that, obviously we're coming up onto our allotted time, but if know that we are going to keep the recording going, and we will make this live on our site and on our social networks shortly after the call. So look to there if you have to jump. Otherwise, please stay with us. We'd love to have you. That's all. Thanks, Alex.
Sure. Meaning like after 2 o'clock, we'll just keep going, plowing through?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Let's take the one question real quick that I saw because it's relevant to Rules Committee. Someone asked what happened to all the other ordinances sent to Rules Committee. It's an excellent question. They have to come out of Rules Committee, and the way that happens is that the chair of the committee, Alderman Michelle Harris, convenes the Rules Committee, and she decides what is going to be on the agenda. And in that committee, each individual item can be re-referred to a different committee. And basically, a lot of power is in her hands anytime this happens, but especially now because we have, by the way, we still don't know exactly how many were sent. We were trying as best we can to keep track, and Erin has a really, I think, comprehensive list better than I was able to hear sitting in the chamber. So we'd be happy to go over that, but it really runs the gamut from like very banal stuff like sign ordinances, subdivisions, zoning changes, that kind of stuff. So we have heard, and I can check Legistar at this moment, but I'm not sure that one has been scheduled yet. Have heard something about a potential Rules Committee meeting next Tuesday when Harris will convene the committee and she'll say, these are the ones that we are breaking free, that we are resurrecting from the Rules Committee. It'll, of course, be interesting to see which one she decides to put on the agenda and which one she doesn't, because it's up to her. And there were several ordinances that were put on the agenda, you know, how would I say this, through the normal way, or that you would expect to go to rules anyway. Like I think Brendan Riley referred Raymond Lopez's ordinance or city council order that would censure the mayor if she does not fill key job posts. That was sent to Rules Committee, and so I'd have to imagine that Chairman Harris is not going to bring that up again. Yeah, it hasn't been scheduled yet, so we'll have to hang tight, but that's basically the long answer to that question. Do we have any other questions at this point, Don?
We do not, but I do wonder, do we know how Alderman Harris thought about the rename of Lakeshore Drive?
No, I'm not sure she's spoken publicly about it, to be honest. She keeps a pretty low public profile, and it seems like that she may not be a huge part of that because the Lakeshore Drive proposal wasn't sent to rules.
Oh, that's right.
It was deferred and published, which is sort of a lower barrier. It just is going to come up again. It doesn't have to be broken out. All right, why don't we move on to this is something that I think we can try to go through kind of quickly because this is a very, we want to talk about the whole range of other things. This is something that has been working through the city council process for a long time and just sort of continues to be stuck, and we're not sure exactly where it goes from here, but essentially this goes back to, we're talking about Alderman Wagasback and Taliaferro's ordinance to create a public database of historic police misconduct complaints going back to, at this point, it would be 2000. This all dates back to last summer when there was a hearing in Wagasback's Finance Committee to discuss a potential settlement, a police misconduct settlement for a man named Charles Green, who alleged he had a lawsuit after having spent many years, I think, in prison on what he alleged were false charges. And as part of that lawsuit, he was trying to break free 50 or so years worth of police misconduct files and try to get the city to publish them. Also relevant to this is that an Illinois judge ruled in 2014 that all historic closed police misconduct files are of the public record. They should be public anyway. And so after this hearing happens, we said that the hearing was for a settlement to settle the case with Charles Green so that the city would not have to publish all of this data. And some Alderman Haddon comes to mind, saying, we don't want, she was calling it hush money, essentially, that by paying this lawsuit settlement, we are buying our way out of this transparency and posting this misconduct data that we should have been from the very beginning. And so after this whole debate, Wagasback says, all right, we need to start some proactive legislative effort to really archive all of this historic data so that we are not just responding to court orders and FOIA requests. And so since last September, he and Taliaferro have been working on this ordinance. They introduced it in September, saying it would order the Inspector General's office to create a full database of historic complaints, kind of open-ended. It has since been narrowed down. Then it was just going to go back to 1994, and it was further narrowed down so that it could get the support of Mayor Lightfoot, who had been opposed to it because she said that it would be too expensive to put together. It has been narrowed down now to the point that the original advocates for it say, well, it wouldn't be effective anymore. There are a lot of ins and outs here we don't have to get into, but I think the most salient, the biggest complaint that they're making is that now it would just publish summary data of each incident, whereas a previous version of the proposal, once someone filed a FOIA request for underlying more detailed data on an incident, that would all be added into the database forever and open. So the Better Government Association and Jamie Calvin, the investigative journalist at the Invisible Institute, who were part of pushing for this ordinance in the first place, are now saying, you know, we had a library and now it's more of just like a card catalog index. So that's the version that came up this month for a proposal. A lot of aldermen were saying, well, Joseph Ferguson, the Inspector General, who would be in charge of putting together the list, he joined these watchdog groups and saying this doesn't go far enough. Ferguson put out this very strongly worded statement saying that this is pocket change, this doesn't do anything. So that's basically where that is now, and it's back to the drawing board on that. And I just wanted to give a little recap on that since it was a big topic of discussion today. Anything before we move on that Caroline or Erin wants to chime in with on that, or anything you noticed, or should we just get into the hodgepodge of other stuff?
One thing I noticed was like aldermen's concern with having to respond to FOIA requests. As someone who submits FOIA requests, it seems like aldermen kind of, repeatedly ask the question like, will publishing this database cut down on FOIA requests? And it seemed like the answer was no.
That was the answer from the law department. I think it's worth pointing out that this has been a proponent. I align an argument posed by proponents, specifically we've heard this from BGA, saying one of the benefits of this is that it will actually save the city money in the long term because they won't have to respond to all these FOIA requests. Instead, people will just be able to look up the information on a list. Jeff Levine in the law department was asked that question last week. Do you think this will save money? And he said, well, there's a debate, but we think there's a good argument to be made that no, it won't save money. So I don't really know. I guess we don't know for sure. But the other aspect of that you brought up about, aldermen were saying, well, why can't we just have people FOIA this? And last month during a hearing, Alderman Samantha Nugent on the Northwest Side, whose ward we should say has a lot of police officers in it, said, well, I'm a little nervous about putting all this information just out there. Like a FOIA protects, that's how it puts safeguards up to make sure that we're not putting out information that we're not supposed to. And the response to that was, number one, the database is going to be redacted in line with open records law anyway. Number two, this is all supposed to be publicly available information anyway. Like a judge has ruled. This is like, we the public have access to this, and does it really matter how it's presented? And there was sort of a line of argument or thinking from some aldermen like, well, I don't understand the big deal. Can't people just FOIA for this anyway? Let me tell you, any of us who have ever filed a FOIA request knows there is a big difference between having to FOIA for something and being able to search something in a public online database. Okay, so looking ahead to the next month, we're probably going to be hearing a lot more about the American Rescue Plan package and how the city is going to spend its share. So this is, of course, from the package that passed Congress and was signed into law by President Joe Biden in late March. Would send, I think alternatively here, 1.8 and 1.9 billion to the city of Chicago. So maybe somewhere between that. But also we heard that the allocation to the state of Illinois was revised upward. So maybe we'll have to hang tight and see if that ends up being the final amount. We knew from the very beginning that this big, basically pot of money falling into the sky essentially is going to spawn a massive contentious debate among all different factions about how it should be spent. We don't really know a whole lot about how it's going to be spent yet or where it's going to go. It seems like this next month in June is really when that's going to get underway. The mayor has said that she is aiming by the June City Council meeting to put out her proposal and had really deflected questions about how she's going to come up with that or what it's going to be. And until very recently, she wasn't saying anything until a couple of days ago. She said during a press conference, we're going to have this sort of collaborative process. We're going to bring people in. We're going to talk to people in the community. We know the Budget Committee Chair, Alderman Pat Dowell, has sent a Dear Colleagues letter to all the aldermen saying, hey, we want to hear your ideas for how to spend all this money. So get that to us by next Friday, June 4th. But yeah, the interesting thing is we had heard that the one thing definitively we had heard from the Lightfoot administration was that they wanted to use like half of this money to basically negate the scoop and toss short-term borrowing scheme that was taken out to just carry the city through the pandemic last year. But now it seems like that may not be able to happen anymore, right, Caroline?
Yes, exactly correct. Federal guidelines basically stipulate that this needs to go toward operations and stuff that is happening on the ground right now, relief money, or things that will somehow change the situation on sidewalks. And so wiping out debt isn't really one of them. JB Pritzker was aiming for a similar thing at the state level, also got kind of squashed. So we will really have to see where that money goes. This was the plan though until maybe 10 days ago. A little more than that, 2 weeks. So I'll be really interested to see what the alders kind of submit as options for where the money should go. And then do we have time to talk about transit, or should we move on to kind of what we're looking for next week?
Yeah, transit is a whole other aspect of this that's not going directly to the city of Chicago, but there's a whole other chunk that is going to the RTA, the Regional Transportation Authority, to dole out to CTA, Metra, and PACE. What's that all about?
Well, the most important part of it, one, it's a humongous chunk of cash. Two, $1.5 billion. And two, it's going to go to cover, again, operational costs, so things like payroll and stuff that keeps basically the CTA and Metra and PACE running on a daily basis. That's the area of their budget where kind of COVID has taken the biggest bite, because ordinarily when there isn't a deadly pathogen sweeping the earth, they require that most of their operational costs come from a thing called fare box revenue, which is really just what riders pay to use the services. That took a really intense dive, between 60 and 90% decrease for each of the three agencies. And so this money is going to be really critical for making sure that they don't have to do cuts to service. CTA especially took a huge gamble at the start of the pandemic, and they submitted a revised budget that did a ton of borrowing and basically said we're not gonna cut service. We're gonna move some services like from where people don't need transit to where they need it the most.
It was borrowing future federal stimulus that had not been passed yet, right? Yep. Basically, they passed an unbalanced budget and they left about a $350 million open line item saying, here's where the future federal money is going to come in. Thankfully for them and for those of us who ride transit, that ended up getting filled in and then some. So yeah.
Good times.
So we'll all have to see what happens with that. But the open question, of course, is what happens now many years into the future? Will these transit agencies be able to retain riders, or have we permanently shifted to some kind of, culture that devalues transit, and that's a bigger issue?
Even transit kids and the people who are running these agencies themselves, like, they don't know yet. They're just like, this is still all shaking out, and we're going to need to kind of look at the fare box revenue stipulation and see if that will work in the future. And we need to basically see what percentage of people actually do go back to commuting, and what if we need to change our service patterns to orient less around the commute. Right.
So we should note also that CTA is not projecting its original fare revenue to come back to pre-pandemic levels until what, 2024, 25? So it's going to be a long haul. Okay, so there's a whole smorgasbord of other things that we are keeping an eye on over the next month or so. Obviously, most immediately, there is this state legislative session that people may have heard of that is wrapping up, has a deadline to wrap up by May 31st, which is Memorial Day, this coming Monday. I saw that someone had asked in the lead up to this, an attendee had asked to make sure that we talk about elected school board legislation, that although it is not something that is churning through city council or is city council business, is extremely relevant to the city of Chicago and its governance and politics and elections. So this is still very much in flux, but Caroline, there was a big development yesterday, right?
Yeah, there are now two, quote, vehicle bills that have hit the Senate floor, both sponsored by Senator Robert Martwick, who has been banging this drum for 6 years now. There's the House and the Senate version, and then Kimberly Lightfoot, the Senate Majority Leader, is sponsoring another bill that is basically Lori Lightfoot's measure that Lightfoot has agreed to carry, that would stipulate a hybrid elected appointed board, although that balance, as Lightfoot has conceived of it, is mostly appointed and only a couple of electeds. And then Senate President Don Harmon, who basically got the second House bill that Martwick was sponsoring through the executive committee yesterday by saying he was committed to getting a compromise measure on Governor Pritzker's desk by the end of the legislative session. So they had really better step on it. But reporting has been going around, I think originated by Capitol Facts Illinois, that basically says it's going to be a 21-member school board that is half elected and half appointed until 2027 ? And then
so 10 and 10, and then there's like a tiebreaker in there.
And then the mayor will appoint a president, so that gives the mayor nominal, but by no means guaranteed sway over the board, at least I guess for the next 6 years or so. The House bill that passed yesterday had two other kind of changes in the legislation. One of which was that the whole thing was going to get moved, the whole process was going to get pushed by another year to 2023. So the soonest, if that House bill ends up being the foundation on which this compromise is built, the soonest we would be electing anybody is 2023. And so this was a pretty contentious executive committee meeting yesterday. Lightfoot and Martwick did a lot of back and forth, and Lightfoot threatened not to vote for the bill because she said, basically, just because it's the 11th hour doesn't mean that you have a good bill to Martwick. And Martwick had been going on about, I'm not ending this legislative session without passing something on this. We are too close now. I've been working on this for 6 years. And the citizens of Chicago deserve democracy, which is, his favorite kind of slogan for this whole operation. And
it's also worth noting it's not just Martwick, it's the Senate President, Don Harmon, has promised we are going to pass something by the end of session. So, yeah, you could say that just because session is coming up doesn't mean that something has to be passed technically, but there's a huge amount of pressure to get something passed. This has been one of the banner pieces of legislation moving through.
Yeah, and I have to say, when I saw the reporting on what Harmon seems to have in mind, or what this compromise legislation is shaping up like, I was really surprised. The Lightfoot hybrid bill is a lot closer to what I thought that Harmon's hybrid bill would look like, but Harmon's is really not, at least to my eyes, oriented very strongly toward Mayor Lightfoot or any subsequent mayor. So I don't know, Lightfoot had a press conference yesterday saying just that she was still Lightfoot, not Lightford, said that she was still pretty concerned about the idea of a 21-member school board, elected, appointed, or otherwise, saying that it would be totally unmanageable and that she didn't want the citizens of Chicago to be on the hook for a school board that doesn't answer to either her or city council. Martwick has
sort of similar to, along the same lines, what we're seeing with civilian police oversight, where Lightfoot is saying, I'm the one who, gets blamed when things go wrong. Basically, I'm the one who wears the jacket, as she puts it, and so I should be the one making the decisions.
Stops with her and so on. Yeah, so she is pretty concerned about it. I think it could be a pretty tense next couple days in City Hall as they wait to see what comes out of Springfield as far as the school board goes.
Yes, and other thing, I mean, the mayor was asked this morning if she's following session just about legislative action generally, and she said something to the effect of, this is the most stressful time of year, or like, this is my least favorite time of year, and it could get a lot worse for her, honestly, if she has, if the civilian, if the school board passes over her objection. She's already had a couple pretty big defeats with the firefighters' pension bill and CTU bargaining powers passed over her opposition. I think we should also touch on Representative LaShawn Ford's cannabis legislation that this actually played into yesterday's city council meeting, because there was the Aldermanic Black Caucus is really pushing to stall all city cannabis approvals until the state's social equity licensing system gets worked out. So Caroline, can you give us a super quick recap of what happened yesterday?
Yeah, so they are on the cusp of passing, or they've passed to the Senate floor now, the House bill that passed, I think earlier this week, time is a flat circle, that basically LaShawn Ford has been carrying for this session and is a headache and a half, but seeks to rectify the racial inequities that showed up in the initial rollout of cannabis legalization in the state of Illinois, where only 21 sellers were given licenses to grow, and only 6 of those 21 recipients were sellers of color. There are a lot of reasons why this happened, including the scoring methods, basically, that you got, that the state used to determine who was eligible for the lottery, what it means to be a social equity applicant. So the idea that you can partner with, people of color, people who have been hit by the war on drugs particularly hard, or you can just pledge to hire minority employees, and that's another way to get into the lottery. All of this resulted in a weirdly inequitable situation for the initial rollout. And so Ford is sponsoring a pretty large piece of legislation seeking to correct that. It's going to do a redo of the first 75 slot lottery, and then it's going to do 2 more lotteries of 55 slots each. And then senior advisor to the governor on cannabis, Toy Hutchinson, also a former state senator, said yesterday that they have a 90% total of people who are getting put in these lotteries that are social equity applicants. And so to hear Hutchinson say it, it's sounding like it's going to go better. But this bill passed over some pretty vocal opposition from the Illinois Association of Minority Cannabis Growers. I don't think that's their official name, but it was pretty close.
I just want to go back to one thing. When you said that she said that 90% of applicants are social equity applicants, you mean 90% of the entire pool of applicants?
It was hard to say, but yeah. The people who were originally basically not let into the 75 slot lottery, those guys are going to be majority social equity folks. And then the 2 following lotteries are majority social equity folks as well. And she said that added up to 90%. And so Senator Maddie Hunter was extremely skeptical of this. She was like, we voted for this last time, it was a whole dog and pony show, and how do you know it's going to work this time? And that's the figure that Hutchinson basically trotted out to try and assuage her skepticism about it. And Hunter voted for it, and Kimberly Lightfoot, again the Senate Majority Leader, is the chief sponsor of this in the Senate, and Hunter basically seemed to be voting based on the word of Hutchinson and Lightfoot, that they felt that they were confident that this was going to work this time around. But she was like, Kim Lightfoot, Toy Hutchinson, if this doesn't work this time, you guys are going to get an earful from me, and presumably lose her cooperation if they do another fix-it round.
I mean, this amount of frustration that has come up from the Black Caucus and the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus, and just, among social equity applicants and entrepreneurs of color involved in this, has been, yeah, like you said, a sort of fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me kind of thing. They were very frustrated at the beginning of the process. And we had this debate at the city council level almost 2 years ago, where you had a lot of Black Caucus, Alderman Anthony Beale comes to mind, saying there are not enough teeth in the equity part of the legislation. And yesterday, Beale took a little victory lap, and he was like, guess what? We were absolutely right. It's 2 years, a year and a half into legalization. There are, I'm not sure if there are any yet cannabis dispensaries open in the state of Illinois that are operated either wholly or majority owned by people of color. So we'll see what happens after this next round of changes. I think we should just move. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just briefly, the updated law also includes some important transparency regulations that were championed by Representative Marty Moylan, basically saying that there needs to be a registry of who is selling in Illinois, which should hopefully help with this particular issue, and also prohibiting any member of the state government from being involved in it. So that's one kind of piece of that trailer. Anyway.
Yeah. Last quick legislative thing, obviously we'll be keeping our eye on as it relates to the city of Chicago, is whether the General Assembly does actually end up passing a ethics package. This is something that they had identified as a priority, but have not really publicly, at least, been working on very much. This is, of course, a concern because it could potentially preempt Chicago's entire suite of, or many of their ethics laws, ethics rules that they say are stronger. We ran a commentary from Alderman Smith, the chair of the Ethics and Oversight Committee, and leaders of the Board of Review, who are trying to get the state lawmakers not to pass this bill that would preempt, you basically negate city ethics rules. Want to move on to touch some of the rest of these. You can read more about this particular one tomorrow, but we are following new plan development applications and zoning applications introduced yesterday. There were a lot of them. There were, I want to say, about 15 PD applications and 45 rezones. Sort of like the real estate market is coming flooding back. One that has really caught our attention is that a proposal to build about 270 apartments along right next to the Cumberland Blue Line, way up on the near O'Hare. This is something that Alderman Anthony Napolitano opposed a couple years ago. The developer sued the city and reached a legal settlement with the city, saying that they were going to build offices there. And now they're back and they're saying, no, we want to do apartments again. So Alderman Napolitano is raising a big backlash about that. He's circulating a petition, and basically this looks like the next test case in the battle over aldermanic prerogative, whether he's going to get his way on that. Erin, you flagged some interesting stuff coming from Beale that he introduced to basically give the city council a little more control over the administration, right?
Yeah, so this proposal, which honestly I haven't read it in depth, but Alderman Anthony Beale is proposing that before the Department of Planning and Development spends more than $20,000, that it get approval from City Council first, and that would be for any spending that has a binding effect on the city of Chicago, which I don't quite know what that is, but I feel like anything could really have a binding effect on the city. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. I don't recall if that's one of the proposals that got sent to rules, and if it got sent from more or just by the general process of sending things to rules. And there's another ordinance from, main sponsor is Alderman Byron Cicho Lopez, and it has a few other sponsors, but it would require that city departments inform aldermen when permits or filed lawsuits are issued or filed against the city in the alderman's ward. So I feel like both of those proposals from Beale and Cicho Lopez kind of, seek to take back power.
Take the reins back.
Alderman, yeah.
Yeah. What is interesting is that Byron Cicho Lopez, who has had maybe the most, I want to say, of his ordinances sent to Rules Committee of maybe any other alderman, he proposed this, and it really takes a big whack at the administration, it seems, or at least would try to wrestle some power away from them or get notifications. And it was not sent to Rules Committee. So we're going to have to see where that ends up. And maybe other aldermen find that really attractive. I mean, I can imagine they'd want to know when legislation is proposed, or when litigation, I think is what we're talking about here, is brought against something, in their own words. Just super quick touching on one interesting subject matter hearing. We could have a whole other event talking about the wonderful subject matter hearings that happened over the past month. There could be an update coming to the Chicago Plumbing Code. This is something that has happened, has been a really intense source of discussion among definitely the building and real estate community, that they want to be able to build with PVC pipe. It's a lot cheaper than cast iron pipe, which is what is required in the city of Chicago right now. It's the buildings department has done a pilot program allowing people in some limited situations to use PVC pipe, which is cheaper, and it seems like they are raring to get a more wholesome citywide permanent update to allow that on a grand scale. But the IBEW, I think it is, plumbing union, I might have that union name wrong, but the union that represents plumbers in the area is very much opposed to that. They say that it should stay cast iron. No ordinance introduced yet, but it's something we're going to be keeping an eye on. Last policy matter I want to touch on here, and I know we've been going a while, but there might be an urban forestry board, an advisory board to speak for the trees. Erin, what is that, and what happened with that this month?
Yeah, so that was, this proposal was heard in the Finance Committee. Chair Scott Wagsback held it in committee because he still wants to hear from the Water Department on this proposal. I think because, you know, trees could have to be removed to repair water mains. I don't quite know what the questions are. But yes, this would be strictly an advisory board of volunteers who would advise on the city's tree population, which currently the city is having to remove trees more quickly than they can replace them. So the city's tree canopy is diminishing, which also contributes to rising temperatures in the city. And
this was nuts. You reported this, that the Bureau of Forestry plants 3,000 something trees every year, and they uproot, they take out like 13,000 trees.
Yeah, and that's for a multitude of reasons, whether for like development, maybe the tree is dead, or maybe it's infested with, I don't know, the emerald ash borer, or if that's still a thing.
Some parasite. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm very interested in that, and I'm interested to see how this conversation carries over later this year when budget talks begin, because a lot of aldermen are asking very pointed questions of the forestry department, asking, you know, what do you need from us? We want trees. Do you need more money? The answer is yes, everyone needs more money. And I think without the forestry department has more money this year and next year from the capital plan, but without that infusion, it has $500,000 annually to plant trees, and each tree costs roughly $500. So you could do the math, but it's not enough, is what city officials say.
Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of times I think you hear tree planting get derided a little bit as like, oh, is this really what we're going to be spending money on? Just like planting trees, it can be thought of as a kind of ornamental touch. But especially now, I think more and more research is coming out showing what environmentalists have been saying all along, and you know, forestry advocates have been saying all along, that there are major public health impacts from having trees where you live or not having trees. It has tremendously, they're tremendously beneficial for flood mitigation. You'll be much less prone to flooding if you have tree roots that are sopping up all of that water. You know, there's research tying the presence of trees to crime, to pollution, to asthma and health, and so it really does intersect with a lot of different, you know, racial and environmental justice and public health stories. That is a reason why aldermen and everyone else is really, you know, continuing to watch that and push for it. So that's pretty much everything that we had on our agenda. The last open question was, are we going to get back, or when are we going to get back to in-person committee hearings? This was asked at the end of yesterday's city council meeting, and the mayor basically said, well, we've made accommodations. You can come back if you want, and it's going to be up to the committee chairs. So I guess we'll have to go around asking all the 19 committee chairs to see how they feel about it. There were some mixed reactions among aldermen yesterday who I talked to. Some were like, yes, it's about time, let's get back to normal. Some were like, I have been more productive and been able to attend more meetings in the past year than I have ever been able to before, because you can just have a meeting anywhere and then just like pipe in, zoom into the meeting. So it's going to be, a slow return to normal, but we're going to have to see what happens there. Do we have any other questions that came up? Okay.
No other questions.
I guess we answered everything just in what we were talking about. Thank you so much to everyone who came to talk about city council with us. We hope to do a lot more of these. This has been really fun. And we'll hope also that at the end here, we can just pitch you to subscribe, become a member to the Daily Line if you haven't yet, in part because in the hour and a half that we have been talking about this stuff, but if you can believe it, we have just scratched the surface at all of the other business that is coming before this august body right now. And if you want to read all of it, you would have to see our previews, and our coverage of the city council meeting that we've been publishing this week is a lot more thorough. It will give you a really solid picture of everything that is happening right now. And we're tentatively planning to have another, our next iteration of the press box next Thursday, I think same time. We're going to be talking to Caroline and our Springfield reporter Joel Ebert about what has happened in the legislative session over these past few months, and everything that has yet to happen between now and May 31st that we will be able to talk about next Thursday on June 4th at 1 p.m. So we hope we can see you there.
Well, thanks so much, everybody. We appreciate you coming out today. One last thing to let you know that's coming up in the pipeline here is our second quarter fielding of the Chicago Index, a sentiment survey that the Daily Line and Crane Chicago Business is putting out to get a general understanding of how Chicagoans and people from around the Chicagoland area feel about our elected government. So if you haven't participated in that, you can go to thechicagoindex.com to sign up to be a participant. We are using a really cool piece of software called Polko to help us run this polling platform, or this poll. Polko is a nationwide polling platform. So check that out at thechicagoindex.com. If you have any questions, my name is Don Vincent. You can email me at don@thedailyline.com. Catch us next week. I think it's June 3rd, actually. Alex is next Thursday.
Oh, you're right.
Regardless,
yes.
Visit thedailyline.com, go to the About tab, hit the events button, and you will see our live events. We will have more of these up on our website here in the coming days. So check us out. Thanks so much. I appreciate everybody who stuck with us for nearly 2 hours. So thanks for your time. Thanks for your ears, and we appreciate it. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks.